I'd like to share some thoughts about Malcolm X from the book The Dead Are Arising. The authors Les Payne and his daughter Tamara Payne. Really a work of love from Les. Les, a great Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, and his daughter Tamara completed the work. Les spent many years researching it, done a tremendous job, fantastic book. Talks a little bit about Malcolm in terms of his family life, and really the strength of the book is the elaboration of the family life and a lot of insights that we gain into Malcolm from his family. He was born into the Little family, Reverend Earl Little. There was Malcolm, an older brother, Wilford, Hilda Filbert, who was 2 years older than Malcolm, younger brother Reginald, born August 23rd, 1927, baby Yvonne, born August 11th, 1929, and Wesley, 1931. So a large family. Interesting incident that happens early on. The Ku Klux Klan comes to the house. The Reverend Little isn't there, but his mom is there. His mom really kind of stares them down, and they don't do any damage to the house. They don't burn it down or anything of that nature. But interesting how Louise, the mom, really confronted them and showed strength. And this is something that really became a family characteristic. Louise made and sold clothes. She spoke Spanish, French, and patois, also in addition to English, very intelligent woman. She was light-skinned, had a Scottish father. She and her maternal ancestors were from Granada, so she had a profound influence on the life of Malcolm. The parents stressed reading in the child's education. Earl did home repair projects. He was fired from his job as a meat packer because he was considered to be too uppity. So Earl was not the type to take abuse, which was quite common, and to survive as a black person in those days, you had to be kind of, keep to your place, not say much, even if you were treated unfairly, just kind of take it and go with it. That was the deal. Earl, no, that was not his deal. He stood up for his rights. He was firm, and if he was being taken advantage of or if things were not being done properly, Earl would make that known, of course, as well he should. They lived in Omaha, Nebraska. In Omaha, black man Will Brown was lynched and burned to death as the mob sought vengeance. He was accused of attacking a white woman. That was September 28th, 1919. So, again, this is part of the background of the times in which Malcolm grew up. The UNIA, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, was founded by Marcus Garvey, and the whole concept here was to take pride in being black. Garvey really had a different approach than a lot of the other leaders, black leaders. He said, no, we have to realize who we are. We are black. We should be proud of who we are and what we're about. Different than W.A. Du Bois, different than Booker T. Washington, different than the NAACP. The NAACP, when it was founded, was mostly led by white people. Garvey said, no, we have to take a different path, and he called his association the Universal Negro Improvement Association. So it was about improving the lot of the Negroes, but also taking responsibility for who we are and what we are about. They moved to Milwaukee from Omaha, Milwaukee mostly German at that time. Then they moved to Michigan. Earl's brother James was there in the town of Albion. He had moved from Omaha. And in January of 1928, they moved to Lansing. So a lot of movement going on here with the family, a lot of being unsettled. White workers in Lansing monitored the plants to make sure that no blacks were hired. So that was the deal, because the blacks were starting to move up into the north, but we didn't want to, make sure that certainly that they were not hired. Whites hired, not blacks. That was the deal. The house that they bought in Michigan, Earl was a big believer in buying homes. He would rent on occasion, but wanted to build up some equity, so he believed in buying. And the house they bought had a racially restrictive clause. It could not be sold to a black person, but they kind of ignored the clause and they sold it to him. It wasn't until 1948 that restrictive clauses were ruled unenforceable by the Supreme Court. In 1922, on the other hand, which is the time we're dealing with now, the 20s, the court held them to be legal. So in that matter of 26 years, the court reversed itself. We always say, well, there's a precedent and everything. Well, the court, can reverse itself, has reversed itself, and obvious case here. Their home in Michigan was set on fire. The fire department refused to respond to the call. And Earl was arrested as a suspected arsonist and later released. So who do they blame? They blame the fellow who lost his home. I mean, crazy stuff, right? The key in terms of Malcolm's growing up, important to understand, and Les Payne and Tamara, they bring it out very clearly in the book. The key is don't act like you are inferior. The parents instilled two things in the children: independence and racial pride. You are not inferior. You are not second to the white person. You are equal in every respect. Have pride in who you are and what you're about. Malcolm's father would take him on his organizing trips for the UNIA, so Malcolm got to know what his father was about, what Earl would do, how he would speak at these gatherings. He was a great organizer. He was one of the chief organizers for the UNIA and worked closely with Garvey. During the Depression time in 29 and after, Negroes were fired if there were whites who were unemployed. So if there was a white person who needed a job, black person had a job, black person is fired, the white person gets the job. That was the normal course of events. The Black Legion, which was a vigilante group in Michigan, was responsible for murders of some of the black people. And the Black Legion in Michigan was numbered at its height 25,000 people. So this is not just a small little hate group. This is a rather large, extensive group throughout, many states, but very strong in Michigan. September 28th of 1931, a crucial event happened in the life of Malcolm. And that was his father, Earl, died as a motorman ran over his leg with the back of a streetcar. He was 41 years old. Malcolm felt particularly abandoned by this. Malcolm was 6 and he was in first grade, so this was a traumatic event in his life. And Malcolm always thought that this was not an accident, that this was done deliberately, that someone actually killed his dad. Louise at that time was 34. The insurance company failed to pay on the $10,000 policy. There were rumors of foul play. Malcolm, as I said, believed that his father was murdered, but here you have the insurance company not paying, saying, well, it was a suicide or something like that, crazy stuff, but they didn't pay. Louise was fired many times when employers discovered that she was black, she was light-skinned, could get away with being white. When they saw some of the children and they realized that, she was darker skinned, she was frequently fired. Louise had another child, this later on in 1938, Robert. Louise, however, another tragic event in Malcolm's life. Louise was committed to a mental institution. The children were dispersed to other families, with the exception of Wilfred and Hilda, who tried to keep the family farm going. They had this family farm, and they tried to keep it going as best they could. Louise, it was difficult for her to get jobs. As we said, she was fired. She tried all sorts of things. But the pressure of raising all these children, of losing her husband, got to her, and she was, for the rest of her life, in a mental institution. So Malcolm, what happened to him? He started hanging around, as you can well imagine, with a crowd that got into trouble for really minor offenses. He stopped going to school. He began growing and selling marijuana as a way of raising some funds. Malcolm was then placed in a detention home, and he originally did very well there. That was in Mason, Michigan. He was kept back a year in school, did well in all aspects of school life. He was elected as president of the student council, did well on the basketball court and the boxing ring. Key moment, though, in his high school years, and another one of these moments that really impacted his life. He approached a teacher he respected and told that teacher that he wanted to become a lawyer. The teacher told him that the N-word cannot hope to become a lawyer and that he should pursue carpentry instead. Malcolm knew the limitations of carpentry as a career because his father was continually frustrated in his career and denied jobs by restrictive unions and employers who would not hire black workers. And after he had this experience, he became very frustrated and he began to give up on school. He went to Roxbury, Massachusetts to be with his half-sister Ella. She was a bit of a shady character. She engaged in a lot of illegal activities, such as shoplifting and robbery. But just before Pearl Harbor, more jobs opened up for blacks. Ella became more respectable and avoided a number of the illegal activities that she had turned to during the Depression. Ella got involved in real estate dealings and in trying to obtain money from her two ex-husbands. She started to do really well. Ella spoke about the mystique of Malcolm being the seventh child of their father, this mystique of the seventh child. So Malcolm gets involved in the Harlem scene, gets involved in drug use, selling pot, involved with guns, turns to burglary, is caught, sentenced to 8 to 10 years in prison. Other members of his team also get caught. But in prison, there's a conversion. He becomes self-educated and is very much influenced by the Muslim movement. The Prophet Noble Drew Ali, combining Islam and Christianity, this idea of taking these two, Islam and Christianity, and putting them together and appealing to black people. Malcolm became a principal figure in the Nation of Islam, a great speaker when he got out of prison, married Betty Shabazz, and achieved really great prominence in the Nation of Islam. So much so that he would go and he would form different groups. He went to Hartford, formed a group there, mostly on the East Coast, very active in the Newark movement, active in Boston, active in Harlem, and really became very well known in Islamic circles in the Nation of Islam movement, and then more widely in the country. Very interesting event that Payne comments on in the book, and that is a meeting that Malcolm attended and another associate at the behest of Elijah Muhammad, the leader of the Nation of Islam, leader with the KKK. Now, you would think that why would someone who's representing a black movement want to meet with someone from the Ku Klux Klan? But interestingly enough, they were both united in their opposition to the NAACP and some of their the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Martin Luther King, that whole approach. And so the KKK hated what was happening with that. And so they saw a common bond, that they had the same enemies in a way. And they tried to kind of, sort of work out something where they could work in harmony with one another, give one another information. Never really materialized, but interesting that they were thinking in that direction. What happened then is Malcolm became privy to the corruption in the leadership of the Nation of Islam. He saw a misuse of funds. He saw sexual affairs that the leader was having, Elijah Muhammad, and so he became disillusioned and gradually withdrew from the Nation of Islam. And then had a little bit of a kind of reconciliation with Martin Luther King Jr. They got to meet together and share together. And Malcolm sort of changed a bit in the sense of not so much of an anti-white attitude as he originally had, but more of a sense of unity. And that was partly a result of his pilgrimage, his hijrah to the Kaaba in Saudi Arabia, the great pilgrimage that those who are followers of Islam try to make at least once in their life as part of their faith. And he saw people from various backgrounds and different colors of skin and different customs, and he became aware of the importance of a more unified approach. Unfortunately, Malcolm's home was bombed, and he was assassinated by nation members from Newark. Two of the three that were involved were never apprehended. One of the fellows was. Others were charged who weren't really involved in the assassination. And the assassination took place in the sense that Malcolm did have bodyguards, but he kind of relaxed some of the restrictions that they wanted to put in place, and these fellows came in and really shot him. They just sat right there in the audience, and they shot him, and they left, and they got away, and were never really apprehended. And Payne kind of indicates that the pursuit of those criminals was kind of lax, that he felt that not all of the avenues that could have been used by law enforcement were used. Very interestingly, when you look at Malcolm and you ask, well, what was his legacy? What did he leave in terms of the movement among black people? Certainly an outstanding speaker, a great debater, very knowledgeable in terms of the study that he put into the movement for black freedom. But his legacy really consists of two things that are very important, very significant for black people today, and for all people, really. The first is black self-reliance, the importance of not looking to others, but relying on yourself. Very significant, very important, and certainly we saw this among the Nation of Islam members, a lot of them. Certainly there was a lot of corruption in the leadership, but in terms of a lot of the programs that they initiated, programs to help people that were in prison, programs to get people off drugs, get rehabilitated from the addiction of alcohol, become more involved with their families, pursue education. A lot of these values were promoted by the Nation of Islam and by other groups like the Black Panthers, certainly. And the idea that we can't look to the government, we can't look to white people, we have to look to ourselves. We have to develop ourselves and rely upon our own knowledge, our own achievements, our own abilities. And certainly that was a great contribution that Malcolm made. And he was a great example of it in terms of what he went through. And that was I think a lot of the influence of his father and of the philosophy of Marcus Garvey, and Garvey himself was kind of treated very shabbily. He was exiled from the country on a charge, mail fraud charge that seemed kind of a weak charge. But J. Edgar Hoover and others, had him targeted as a troublemaker, and so let's get rid of him, that type of thing. But this whole concept of black self-reliance, and the second thing that was very significant, I think, in terms of Malcolm X, and the Paines bring this out, is the importance of striving for self-improvement. To never say, well, I'm done, I'm finished, I can't do it, this is a block, this is an obstacle, this person won't give me a job, whatever, the deal. No, you must strive for self-improvement. And the onus of that is on yourself. A very significant, I think, insight that comes from the life of Malcolm X. So when we see his life, we see certainly a lot of tragedies, the death of his father, his mother having to be institutionalized, home being firebombed, his family home being burned down, the obstacles that people faced in getting jobs, all of those things, but none of that stopped him. And even in prison, kind of taking control of his life, getting the education that he needed, and getting a pathway forward in his own life. And then having the courage to call out the leader of the group that here you were really at the height of your popularity, but to have the courage to say no to the leadership when you discovered that the leadership was corrupt. You had the courage to stand up to that leadership at great personal cost to yourself, because you knew that they were going to come after you. He was not surprised that they tried to firebomb his home. He wasn't surprised that they tried to make attempts on his life. He knew the viciousness that was involved. They considered him to be a traitor. He considered himself to be just an honest person who spoke the truth, and he did speak the truth about Elijah Muhammad. And he also showed the inconsistencies of a lot of the theology of the Nation of Islam. It was kind of a hodgepodge theology, a mixture of Christianity and Islam that never really worked in a logically coherent way. And so Malcolm saw that, pointed it out. So he had, I think, a lot of courage, because he made a great personal sacrifice, certainly himself, his family. But he put his principles first. So in a lot of ways, I think we can admire what he was able to accomplish, certainly what he was able to do, how he, after, dealing with certainly many encounters with the criminal system, many illegal activities he was engaged in, but certainly then converting, going in a new path in his life, and really embracing this tremendous gift, I think, of courage that he had to stand up for the truth. So really a great example for many of us, and really, I think, an important role model to look at in terms of standing up for the truth, standing up for what is right.